And welcome to another edition of the All Angels podcast. I am Dan Garcia. And then, of course, our guest, returning guest, Rhett Bollinger from MLB.com. Rhett, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on again.
So, obviously, last time we talked, it was just right after the season. I believe Perry just got hired as the Angels GM. And they've actually had quite a bit of, even though some people don't think so, have had quite a bit of a off season making moves wise. And so I'm going to throw them up right here. And this is kind of the main moves they've made to date. Obviously, there's still more time with spring training being a couple weeks away, but the guys I have right there, the main guys, any of them stand out to you in particular that can really help the Angels going forward into 2021?
I would think that acquiring Iglesias, a closer from the Reds, and that trade's a big move for them. He's been one of the better closers in the majors the last few years. Definitely a step up for them. Last year they had big hopes for also Robles after his good season before that, but obviously Robles had a tough year, and obviously now signing with the Twins. So in the market for a closer, able to get him in a trade, and basically it was more of a salary dump type trade too. Didn't have to give up too much. That's kind of a big move for them. I think Quintana has been, pretty underrated throughout his career. Last year was hurt, didn't pitch much. So we'll kind of see. It's kind of always hard to kind of judge the 2020 stats anyway in the short season, but I think those are probably the two biggest ones. We'll see. Obviously, Jose Iglesias is going to have defense. Chris Suzuki is still a pretty good hitter for a catcher. Cobb, they're hoping he can kind of go from the AL East to the West and get better. Claudio's not a hard thrower. Probably think is the slowest fastball in the majors, but get the a lot of weak contact. So yeah, these guys definitely could make an impact. They're all big thing about them is they're all in the last year of their contract too. So it gives them flexibility going forward, but also those kind of things are kind of sometimes hit and miss. In the past, we've seen Cahill and Harvey, Tehran go wrong. So we'll see.
Yeah, obviously you mentioned Jose Iglesias filling in obviously for Andrelton Simmons, who's moved on to Minnesota, your old stomping grounds a little bit. Obviously Simmons being one of the top defensive shortstops, in history. Can Jose fill that hole at least a little bit, or is he going to kind of be just hope you put him in there and he can do a respectable job?
I think Iglesias is definitely a good defender too. He's not obviously at Anderson's level. Anderson's healthy and he's still the best probably shortstop defensively right now, even at his age and with the injury concerns he's had. Iglesias, is coming off a big year, even offensively. Like I said, it's hard to really know how much it's really going to translate over in a full season. But he's got a lot of experience. I think the big thing is I think he's probably more likely to have a healthy season than Anderson at this point. I think Simmons, last few years has had those ankle injuries at first base. Hopefully for his own sake he can stay healthy, but it just hasn't really happened in recent years. So I think if we had to bet on a guy to have a full season of health, it'd probably be Jose Iglesias. So in that sense, you have a little bit more, more of the guy's going to play a little bit. But I do think that Anderson's a better player. But I do think that Jose can definitely step in and fill in for him for sure.
Then obviously, the big thing for the Angels coming into this offseason, a lot of fans, all the fans wanted starting pitching. And obviously you look at the names up here on the board, not a lot of sexy names, like you mentioned, Jose Quintana, can he be healthy and really contribute? Alex Cobb is still kind of, hopefully it's a Bundy 2.0 kind of situation, getting him out of Baltimore and getting him away from the New Yorks and stuff like that. How does this rotation measure up to last year's rotation, do you think? Do you think they got better? Do you think they kind of stayed the same without getting a major arm like a Bauer, like some of the other guys out there for trade market?
Yeah, I guess it's hard to say. It's probably pretty similar to last year. Same kind of thing. They're hoping that Tehran is going to have a big year. It didn't happen. He obviously had a tough year with, he had COVID not going into the season too and never really, kind of put it together. Maybe he would have done better in a full season, but he's kind of a similar pitcher to Quintana as a guy that was better a few years ago. Has good career numbers. So I think Quintana, is at this point definitely a better bet than Tehran was. I do think he's better than that. But Alex Cobb, same thing. You never know. His ERA in Baltimore was above 5. Obviously, like I said, Dylan Bundy 2.0. Bundy did switch over from that league. But Bundy, I think was a guy that people kind of thought could break out more and was younger. Cobb's already, I think 33 or so. So he's been around a little bit. But I do think he can improve just because I do think it will be better pitching in the AL West, and I think they can make some tweaks here and there. He does have a good sinker and then, a good breaking ball. It's just a lot of the metrics last year, though, still showed he wasn't very good. So It's kind of a wild card for that, and the rest of the rotation is still kind of the same. I think at least this year that Bundy is the team's top pitcher, and then you got Heaney right behind him, and Griffin Canning in that probably number 3 spot with the new guys behind them, and then and then also you got to worry about the amount of innings though too. Coming off season and all that, you got to have guys fill in there, and so I think obviously in the depth you'll see Jaime Barria and Sandoval, and maybe even Reed Detmers later in the year. So there is some depth there, but they just don't have that frontline guy, unless you want to count Bundy as that. They don't really have anybody up there that's kind of ace of the staff. And I think the only one really out there this offseason was Trevor Bauer, but it seems like that obviously didn't happen, and looks like he might be signed with the Mets.
Yeah, I'm about to say we might actually get that update as we record this. You mentioned it, Trevor Bauer. Trevor Bauer was the main target for a lot of teams this year, especially the Angels, and just because of one situation or another didn't work out. But to me, it felt a lot different than last year with the Garrett Cole free agency. Like last year, it seemed like it was hot from the beginning, and it obviously it didn't last as long. But it seems like the Bauer kind of picking up, it kind of fizzled at the end. Not a lot of people seemed to be interested in him afterwards, where Cole was like always. Did you feel like a kind of difference with the people going after Cole compared to going after Bauer this year?
Yeah, I think even as the Angels in general, you can do that. I mean, I think they really went after Cole hard last year. I think they also, made pretty good offers and tried, for Strasburg and for Wheeler, the top guys. When they really tried for those guys, they just struck out. And so they pivoted and, went with Anthony Rendon and spent their money, elsewhere, at third base. Rendon's still the best third baseman out there. So, it makes sense to get, better where you can. But, the top of that rotation has been such a, weak link for so long. You want to kind of get somebody in there. And this offseason, the only guy that was really in that market was Bauer. But, I think there were just, more question marks about him than I think it was pretty obvious that Cole's an ace and that kind of thing. And even the other two, whereas I think Bauer, is coming off this Cy Young year, but it was a shorter season and he's had some inconsistency in the past and hasn't really had, that many strong seasons despite his reputation. So I think some teams are a little bit, we're a little bit more weary to kind of make a big offer. And I think the Angels too, their contract situation was different this offseason. I think if they would have gave Bauer the kind of money he was looking for, they're going to go, over to the CBT. They didn't want to do that. Last year, they could make a big offer to Garrett Cole and they could have stayed under it and been fine. This year, they really couldn't do that. The only way they can really make a big contract offer was to backload it basically because of, the way that works. But also even that is the average contract value. So it really wouldn't help them anyway. So even on paper, as much as they would have been a match, just in terms of need, I think in terms of financial parts, it never really made sense anyway. So I think that wasn't a surprise to me that they kind of fell out of that race, but it is tough for the fans, especially to, have another ace out there that Angels couldn't get. And so maybe it's next year.
Right.
I think the good news is they do have money coming off the books with, Pools after this year and, Upton after that. So from there, they're actually pretty clear to do those kind of big moves, but it's a long waiting game and you're just kind of waiting, and Trout's not, getting any younger.
Right. And then I guess the good thing, and we kind of talked about this before, you look at what the AL West has done as a whole. They haven't really done a whole lot. The other teams, obviously the A's have lost a lot of guys. Seattle hasn't really done anything at all. You can say the same thing about Houston. How has this team maybe closed that gap a little bit from, obviously being a third place team last year, right behind the Astros, to where they are probably now with the moves they've made and the lack of moves the other guys have made?
Yeah, it's true. The division has not really gotten better. If anything, it's gotten worse as a whole. The A's, losing Marcus Semien and losing Liam Hendricks is probably the best closer in baseball. They're big losses for them. Those guys are a huge part of that team. And, same thing with the Astros and George Springer. In that rotation, they've got some younger guys getting up, Framber Valdez and some of those guys look pretty good. But, otherwise, Verlander's hurt and, Greinke's obviously getting older now too. It seems like the A's are obviously count on some of those younger arms for sure too. And the Rangers are still kind of in that rebuilding kind of mode, and same with the Mariners. So I do like what the Mariners are doing kind of in general and kind of the long term. They do have a lot of good prospects and a lot of young talent, a lot of fun players in that team, but they're not quite ready at that compete level yet. So I do think the Angels are kind of right up in that mix with the A's and the Astros, just because those teams took a step back and the Angels took at least some step forward this offseason. I wouldn't say they've had this huge offseason, but they have plugged their holes. They have made some moves. Instead, even getting Iglesias from the Reds was, definitely a big move for that bullpen. So, and also the Angels, could obviously still add some relief help too, which I think is definitely something they could definitely use going into the, spring training, which is coming up here in just a few weeks.
And that was going to be my next question. Obviously, you mentioned it. It seems like it's pretty obvious they're out on the Bauer thing, and they may have probably been for a little while. Do you think they now target some more bullpen arms, or do you think they go after like another starter with the money they kind of have left over? I know it's not a ton, but they still, I think, still have a little bit left over to spend before the start of the season.
Yeah, I would think more in relief help than starting pitching, just because I do think that, as much as obviously it's good to have as many arms as you can, at some point you can't just unless they want to really hold Griffin Canning back. I just feel like at this point, they're already going to have their 5, we talked about earlier with Bundy and Heaney and Canning, and then, the 2 new additions. And then, Ohtani obviously is a 6th starter too. So I don't know if they want to really add another guy to that mix. I don't know if that really makes sense. Obviously it'd be great if it was, a guy that was better than all those guys and was kind of the lead that staff, but obviously that's not going to happen at this point. So I do think there are definitely a lot of, relief arms out there they can definitely go after. I think that's probably their biggest move, would just be kind of getting relief help, because so far, Alex Claudio should help as a left-hander, and Iglesias, but there are some holes in there. They did DFA, they didn't obviously non-tender a lot of relievers.
Yeah. Yeah, and that was the biggest thing too. When that tendered contract deadline came, you saw the majority of those guys were relief arms. So they picked up Kurt Suzuki to be a backup or platoon player probably for the catching position. Has there been any update on Stassi and where he sits right now? Is he going to be ready for spring training? Is he going to be ready for opening day? Has there been any new news coming from that position?
Yeah, he's supposed to be ready. That's what Perry's been saying. He's supposed to be ready for spring training and ready to go. There have been some reports out there the Angels could go after, make a trade for Wilson Contreras with the Cubs, or even Christian Vasquez with the Red Sox. I don't really see it, because I still see Stassi being their guy. Same thing coming off a big year. Who knows what 2020 means? But it did seem like his swing was a lot better and he was healthy and it looked like a different player. So I do think that it's going to be Stassi as the main guy, and Suzuki backing him up a few times a week. So I don't really see that changing. But Suzuki, definitely has hit over the last few years, even though he is definitely in his late 30s. He's been a pretty solid hitter and won a World Series with Rendon, from the area with Fullerton. But I think that Stassi will be the main guy, though.
So now, catcher position seems to be kind of settled in. You talked about the Iglesias playing shortstop. Obviously, I think that probably means the rest of the infield is obviously set with Fletcher playing second, Rendon third, and then probably Pujols Walsh combination at first. Another big thing that people are wondering is a 4th outfielder. Do you think the Angels go out there and possibly pick up a guy, not necessarily like a minor league contract guy with a spring training invite, but an actual guy to play that 4th or compete for some kind of spot out there in the outfield?
Yeah, Perry was actually asked that in his press conference earlier this week about if they would actually add another outfielder. He didn't rule it out. It does seem unlikely, but he didn't rule it out. I think it's more likely that they'll give Joe Adele a chance to compete for that job in right field. Have Taylor Ward in that mix as well. If they feel like Adele needs more seasoning, then they go with Ward. But then obviously they have to figure out the rest of their outfield and backups too. Kind of figure out some of that depth. So yeah, it is going to be interesting what they do, but I don't. Maybe they do sign a minor league free agent out there, but I don't know that I see them spending like an actual contract money or big money on getting another outfielder. So I do feel like Adele's close and hopefully even could win the job this spring, but I don't see them adding a major league contract in the outfield.
So we've asked the fans to email us questions at allangelspodcast@gmail.com. And so we got one here, and I'm interested in this question because of the fact last year was such a weird year with COVID and you just not being able to be there, but yet it's still Joe Maddon's first season as Angels skipper. But this question is, let me pull it up. He's asked, what would you say are some of the major managerial differences between Mike Scioscia? Obviously, you weren't there for Scioscia, so I don't know if you can answer that. But Brad Ausmus and Joe Maddon, weaknesses and strengths. Was there anything that kind of stood out to you? And again, with Joe, it seems so hard because you got like half a spring training with him, and that was pretty much it.
Yeah, I mean, I think with Sosha, he was there so long and he kind of set a foundation in kind of that Angels or Halo way of doing things. He definitely had, a lot of background with the Dodgers and seeing what they had done and their success as an organization. And I think Sosha definitely preached a lot of defense and base running and aggressiveness with that. Um, as it kind of, they had a good stretch there in the 2000s. Obviously, kind of got away from that. Ausmus, I guess the big thing I noticed was um, he was more likely to pull his starters early. I don't know how much that was his, philosophy or how much it was dictated by the front office. But he was more likely to kind of pull his starters early in the fifth inning, that kind of thing. Whereas Madden was more likely to kind of go with his gut and kind of keep guys in there a little bit longer. Ausmus, he was more of a kind of a quieter guy. He wasn't like a loud leader, wasn't as boisterous, as much of like a storyteller as much as Sosha and Madden. They're kind of more old school. But I did think Ausmus did a good job kind of, keep the team together. He had a tough situation with, the Tyler Skaggs death, and I thought that he did a good job of kind of keeping the team together during all that. But it was just a tough season all around. So I only had the 1 year, but with Madden, I think that it's just more about kind of likes to bring a lot more fun to the the ballpark, and even
Right.
I was there last year. It's a lot of those bringing in games, and Tim Buss, their coach, is doing all these fun, is music and craziness before their workouts, and just motivational speakers and celebrity type people. Charles Barkley was there last year. Just things like that, just kind of more loose, I guess I could say, than the two of them. But yeah, I guess we'll find out more in a full season.
Now coming up, spring training, people are supposed to report like I think in a week or so, pitchers and catchers. What's the latest? Obviously the MLB players and MLB owners talked, and it looks like the players declined the offer that the MLB owners put out there. How's it going to be for you covering the team in spring training? Do you know that yet, or how is that going to work?
I don't know fully yet. Hold on. Yeah, I don't know fully yet. It's going to be kind of up in the air a little bit still, depending on how things are going. I know early on when they first come to camp, no reporters are allowed to show up until they are like full squad workouts and everything. So at that point, I think reporters can start to go, but some of the access is going to be so limited. Especially it's going to be, you're going to be in the press box. You really can't go out to the fields or anything like that. So there's a chance, I might go later in spring, and especially games start. It's so kind of nice thing about, covering the Angels is that, you're able to drive there and not have to worry about, that kind of thing, and making like, longer arrangements. So I can kind of do it more short term. So yeah, right now it's kind of more up in the air to kind of see how it goes, especially early on. I want to see how, everything goes on with the early workouts and how those are covered. And then, yeah, if it makes sense, I'll definitely go out there. I'd love to see baseball in person again.
Yeah.
Be awesome. It's been too long. So, yeah, I'd love it, but just kind of a matter of when it makes sense.
So, one of the things I think a lot of people are, I don't want to say freaking out, but I'm sure you see a lot of it on your Twitter as far as, we mentioned it earlier, the AL West is kind of weakening itself to a point to where it's kind of maybe falling back towards the Angels. Do you, and I guess this is an opinion because I don't expect you to know the answer, but do you have any ideas why this isn't the time for Artie to pounce on it now, as far as like everyone's getting weaker, let's take that extra step?
I mean, I do think part of it is just the fact they don't want to go above that, CBT threshold of what 210 million, whatever it is, and have to pay the taxes on it. So I think that, pretty much every team nowadays abides by that. And it's just kind of one of those unwritten rules, almost like a salary cap, that no one really goes above that, or it's been a little bit more rare. And obviously teams can, I don't think, other owners get mad or anything. It's their call. But I just don't, I just didn't see him doing that, because I think they know if they just are patient and wait, one more year, they get, Albert off the books, and they wait 2 more years. And then, as I said earlier, you get Upton off the books. And all of a sudden now, outside of, just Trout and Rendon, you have nobody else in the books. And obviously Trout and Rendon are 2 big contracts. But then other than that, you're totally free. So from there, you can kind of rebuild, build up the team the way you want to, whether you want to go into free agency next year and really spend a bunch and get more pitching then compared to this offseason. It's just I think it's just more of a wait of 1 year. And then I'm sure that, I'm sure Perry will find out more about it as we kind of learn more about him and see if they can talk to him more. But I'm sure he had a plan that was kind of laid this out to Artie and how it's all going to work. And obviously Artie has a ton of say on exactly how his spending is going to go and all that. And I do think that It's probably one of those things where this offseason was probably never going to be the year they were going to go all in on one guy. But I think that there's certainly a chance it could be next year and the year after that.
And this brings up a good point. So maybe Perry and the scouts have a new way of developing talent. Has he talked about any of his ideas as far as developing the prospects in the system and the new guys coming in through the draft and anything like that?
Not really, but he does have a background, in scouting and that kind of stuff. And he's brought in some guys from other organizations that have, big time backgrounds in scouting and development, and guys he, is with the Blue Jays and other teams that, guys he's met along the way. So he's still building out that front office too, which will be key. And sometimes too, the new GM will come in and keep guys in their role, like the current, scouting staff and their roles, and then kind of give them a year to kind of assess them and then see where they're at from there and then really rebuild it. That's kind of, I remember when I covered the Twins when they brought in their new leadership with, Derek Falvey and Thad Levine. They kind of almost did like a 1 year look over at all the guys, and then from there kind of reevaluated who they needed to replace and what they kind of wanted to do. We'll find out more from Perry as we go along. We really haven't had that much, time with him in terms of just finding out all the deeper stuff. More of kind of what they're doing now kind of thing. But in terms of his philosophies and all that, we'll definitely certainly find out more, as we go along.
And that's something too that kind of interests me, because you did spend so much time in Minnesota before coming to Anaheim to cover the Angels. And they have been a team where you don't think of the Twins as like a big market team, because they're not. They have to do it a certain way as far as building a team through prospects and stuff like that. In your opinion, is that the smartest way you think the Angels can build a not only a contender for like a year, because you're kind of seeing teams like San Diego go all in for this year, and you're just not sure if that's going to be able to last, 3, 4, 5 years. But I think that's the smartest way for the Angels to be a consistent, competitive team. Just take your time, build through the system, kind of like what the Twins did while you were there. And then obviously now they seem to be competing for AL Central titles almost every year.
I mean, that's the way to do it if you can, but the problem is that they can't, right now. When you have Mike Trout and Rendon on that roster, you can't start doing rebuilding. And obviously you want to try to build up that farm system the best you can. And I do think even Billy tried to do that over the years and got some of those guys, Joe Adell and Brandon Marsh and some of these guys in the system. It's they try to, I guess Billy always called it rebuilding on the fly. When you have Trout on that roster, you're always trying to win too. So you're always trying to add veterans when you can. And a lot of times, with short-term contracts, and we've seen it again, same thing with Perry this offseason. So that's kind of been the thing. It hasn't really changed too much. And outside of the Rendon and, Trout extension, of course, were huge under Billy. But I mean, like the pieces outside of that, they kind of are more the short-term pitching deals, those kind of things. And, a lot of those backfired too. So it's an interesting concept to be able to kind of build this roster, because it's just they have to win, and you can't really take steps back and get more draft picks or, or tank or anything like that. You got to continue to build a better roster. And as you do that, it's harder to, to draft and develop, but you have to be able to do both, and obviously the Dodgers, some of these teams, and the Rays, obviously they have these crazy farm systems, and the Angels just aren't really there yet. They do have some intriguing young players, and in development's going to be huge, but so we don't really exactly know what Perry's going to do specifically to address that. And we don't even really know exactly the draft, if he's going to go college heavy or prep heavy. It seemed like under the last regime, it was a lot of shortstops and a lot of outfielders and center fielders and a lot of toolsy athletic guys that were on the younger side, and but never really hit on the pitchers. So it's going to be interesting to figure out how he's going to actually get pitching and develop pitching, because that's going to be the key. And we're not really sure yet how Perry's going to do that.
And you bring up pitching, young pitching, and that automatically in my head pops up Reed Detmers, the first round pick they got last year out of Louisville. Has there been any talk with him, or has anyone asked what their plans are with him coming into this year? Do they expect him to make some kind of debut at the major league level, or is they going to try to hold him down to minor league as much as they can?
I think at this point, whenever he's ready, he'll come up, as long as there's a spot for him. And I'm sure there will be at some point in the season, especially with this year, I said, with all the concerns about people's, innings limits last year and all that, or innings pitched. But so, yeah, I think that he'll make his debut this year if everything goes to plan. He has to pitch well. I mean, he'll start in, AAA, I'm sure, maybe even AA and pitch in the minor leagues and kind of get his feet wet there. But, he got experience last year pitching in Long Beach in the alternate camp, and from what they say, I mean, he's pretty much close to major league ready. He's got, lefty. We'll see how the velocity plays, and especially every 5 days, every 6 days. It held well in college, every week. But if it can hold, it's got enough velocity for lefty. It's not his best quality, but it's more just he's around the zone a lot. He knows how to pitch. He could be a pretty serviceable lefty in this league. So I think with them, as soon as he's ready, there's no reason to hold him back. He's not one of those guys you have to worry about service time, or he's not going to get some huge contract at the end of it probably. And if he does, great, good for him. But I think he's more of the guy. Whenever he's ready, just bring him up and put him as part of that rotation.
I kind of mentioned it a little bit earlier with the Padres, San Diego kind of going, seems like all in with the moves they made this offseason. You're seeing a lot of like a couple teams buying everything and a lot of teams selling everything. Is this going to be one of those seasons where there's going to be the haves and the have-nots, and then if the Angels just kind of seems like there's going to be in the middle?
Yeah, it does seem like that. It seems like the Angels are the one team. It's always kind of in the middle. Otherwise, it does seem like it's definitely a league now where, if you're better off, they kind of, I don't know if they learn more from the NBA or whatever, but it's almost like it seems like you're better off just being really bad and trying to tank and get those early draft picks and everything else that comes with it than you are to really compete there and, and save your money and then spend that money later, obviously, hopefully. But yeah, there's the super teams, the Dodgers and the Yankees. The Astros are part of that, but it doesn't seem like they're really part of that anymore. And right now, obviously, the Rays are a very good team as well. But the Padres are absolutely in that mix now. They had a great offseason, one of the better ones in recent memory in terms of just adding, impact talent. But said you never know. I mean, sometimes you get all these guys and it doesn't work out. But at the same time, they have so much depth otherwise. Even if some of these moves don't work out, they're still going to be fine because we saw it last year. They were already good and young last year. They're only going to get better. That's going to be fun. At least the Dodgers have some competition for the first time in a while in that division. I know there was that one year I think they tied the Rockies. They beat them in the tiebreaker. But otherwise, I mean, it's really seems like they win that division pretty handily most years too. So it'll be fun to see, especially here on the West Coast, be able to watch those two teams a lot and have some fun in the West Coast baseball. I think a lot of fans wish what the Padres are now. The Angels could have been around Trout, but it took a lot of things out too. They tore down big time too, and just did things the Angels really can't do around Trout because they got to continue to try to win with him.
Yeah, and that was my biggest thing too, especially when the trades for Snell and Darvish and all that stuff were going through. I'm sure you saw it on your Twitter. A lot of fans asking why couldn't the Angels, done the same thing. And then you start looking at the prospects that were moved, and then you kind of look at the Angels prospects and realize they didn't have a lot to match up with those other teams, with San Diego to bring those kind of guys over. But that still leaves the door open for trades in mid-season. I'm guessing, and like you mentioned it, Albert's done after the end of this year. His contract's out at the end of this year. I'm guessing, and I'm sure you probably agree, that they could probably bring in one of these tradable arms at the trade deadline and not have to necessarily worry about going over at that time because it's kind of the halfway point of the season. Yeah,
definitely. And I think even Perry kind of alluded to that yesterday when we talked to him just about how he said that right now, they're probably not really looking to add to the rotation, but it could be added to later this year. And said we can't totally rule out they're not going to add starting pitching this offseason or one more guy, but it just seems really unlikely to me. But yeah, I would certainly think that at the deadline they would consider adding pitching. I mean, if they're in it, if they're not in it, you got to do what you got to do. But if they're trying to continue to get in the playoff push, because this year, right now the way it's going is there's not going to be expanded postseason, so it's going to be a little tougher to get in. But if they want to make that extra push, we always know that pitching's always their biggest need.
Yeah, and talk about that. How hard is it? Well, I guess for the AL teams, it's not that bad because you have a DH no matter what. But I guess as an opinion, how hard is it, do you think, for these NL teams to kind of figure out what they want to do roster-wise when they can drop the universal DH on them, a week before the season starts?
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I still think it probably won't happen that way, but you're right. I mean, I think more than anything, they hope they have enough depth. But like we talked about earlier, I feel like the really good teams already have super teams like the Padres and Dodgers, and those teams in that league already have enough guys, and they're the ones that are trying anyway. And then the teams that aren't really trying don't have those guys, and they weren't going to add them anyway. So, but it could obviously change it with a kind of a late rush to the market if that does happen, and some guys that are kind of more obviously offensive first could get signed.
And two, with the season coming up, the season last year with the COVID, and besides a couple blips, the Cardinals, the Marlins, where they had huge postponements and had to make it up. coming into the season, they want to do 162. Do you feel comfortable saying, or how do you feel about them getting it done, getting 162 games done, because they've had that experience last year and they can kind of go back to that when something might pop up?
I mean, I hope so. I mean, it's going to be interesting, though. It's hard to predict. We've seen the NBA and NHL, especially the NBA, got hit pretty hard by COVID postponements, and baseball's a pretty tight schedule. So there's, sometimes Mondays and Thursdays, and those off days you can fit games in, but teams, are playing all over the country. So they could do the rule with the double headers and make those shorter again to make that easier. But it does seem pretty inevitable that there probably will be outbreaks, right? It's probably going to happen in camp. It's probably going to happen during the season. So yeah, you kind of cross your fingers and hope for the best, but it's really impossible to predict how it's going to go, for sure.
So I want to thank you, Rhett, for jumping on again to the All Angels podcast. Obviously, if you guys haven't yet, make sure you follow him on Twitter at Rhett Bollinger. Set your alarms, set everything going on, because now that we are headed into spring training in a couple weeks, obviously there's going to be updates daily about how your favorite players are doing here and there, and obviously his stories that he writes for MLB.com. So again, Rhett, I want to thank you for taking time out and catching up with me and all the offseason moves, and hopefully we will talk to you again at the end of spring training when we are about to start the season.
Awesome. Always have fun on this.
All right, man.